Hey there, welcome. My name is Brittany. So I have had a lot of questions personally from friends, mainly about homeschooling. I think with all of the craziness that's going on in the world, a lot of people are starting to consider actual homeschooling instead of doing some of the distance learning or potentially sending their kids to school this upcoming year. So I thought it would be helpful to put out a video about kind of the steps that you might take if you were going to start looking into homeschooling and you have no idea where to start. So I have put together a list of different things on where I would recommend that you start as a new homeschooler. So the very first place that you need to start, if you have made the decision that, okay, this is what we want to do, we're all in, what do we need to do first? The very first thing is you need to check your state's laws. So I'm going to put a link in the description box of this video to the HSLDA website that will take you straight to a map that you can click on your state, and it'll have all of your state laws and regulations on what you need to do to fulfill everything required of you for your state. Some states are a little bit more strict and you have to do testing and you have to track your grades and report them to the state. And then some states like Texas, for example, where I'm at, it's much more relaxed and you have much more freedom. Kind of a caveat, if you are looking to start homeschooling and you are potentially sending your kids back to school once all of this craziness dies back down, then you will need to be a little bit more organized with your grading system and with your recording system, and maybe do a little extra than is required of you, just in case there is a question about when they come back being ready for the following grade. Generally, elementary and middle school is a little bit less strict. When you get into high school, there are going to be credits that are required for graduation when you're in the public school system, not for homeschooling, but in the school system. There are credits that are required for graduation, and so you may have to make sure that they're taking certain courses in order to qualify for graduation if you plan on sending them back. You may also have to take a certain program in your state. I'm not sure on all of that, so if that is where you are at and you are dealing with kids that are in high school, I'm hesitant to direct people to the actual school board because sometimes, I don't want to say they're dishonest, but they can be a little misleading on what is actually required. But as far as what is required for graduation, I feel like that's really the only accurate place that you can go to figure out what they would need in order to re-enter the school system to graduate. Now, if you're dealing with, like I said, if you're dealing with elementary students or middle school, they're not dealing in credits, hours, they are dealing strictly in grade levels. And so as long as you have a record of their grades, you should be good to go to send them into back into the school system. Now, if you are looking to pull out of the school system altogether completely, then you don't have to worry about any of that. If you're looking to homeschool from next year until they graduate, all you have to do is make sure that you are following those laws and regulations for your state. So the next step, once you have figured out what you have to do to meet the state requirements, is I would take a step back and look at your specific family's needs. Do any of your children have special needs like ADHD or dyslexia or autism? Do they have, are you co-parenting? Just different things that could potentially cause you to change what you would do with your specific child. You absolutely can homeschool children who have special needs. My oldest has pretty severe ADHD. I have ADHD. I have several friends who have kids who are on the spectrum and who have dyslexia, and they actually do very well being homeschooled. So if that's the case, you still can homeschool them, and they will likely thrive in that homeschool environment. But you may have to alter how you homeschool, just tweak things here and there to fit their individual needs. You're also going to be looking at things like, your spouse's preferences on schooling and what they might want, how many kids you're going to be schooling. That might impact your decisions on curriculum and things like that. Whether or not you're going to continue to work or you're staying home, that could make a difference in whether or not you choose a specific curriculum. Just kind of look at your family as a whole and make a list of any kind of extenuating circumstances that are kind of out of the norm, or maybe not out of the norm, but that are things that you may have to take into consideration. Beyond that, I would start looking at what your end goal is. Is your end goal for all of your kids to go to college? Is your end goal for them to just, maybe not go to college, just have a very well-rounded education so they're ready to enter the world, after high school? At this point is typically a good time to also put together a mission statement. Look on Google and Pinterest for things about homeschool mission statements and find some awesome resources on trying to create your own mission statement and figure out what that's all about. It's basically just figuring out what your goal is while schooling. It helps to give you a baseline. Inevitably, whenever we start homeschooling, we end up on all of these little rabbit trails because there's just so much. There are so many different options with curriculum and with how to homeschool. If you're going to join a co-op or a homeschool group, there's so many options with homeschooling. So having a mission statement that you can reflect back on frequently helps you to make sure that what you are doing on your day-to-day lines up with your end goal. It's also important to identify your worldview. Basically, there are two streams of curriculum. So you'll have your Christian curriculum and your secular curriculum. So Christian curriculum is going to be creation-based. It's going to obviously start as, God is the creator and Christ is, our Savior, and He is going to be a big focus in our education. Secular is going to be evolution-based. So you need to figure out what your worldview is. Okay, so that was a big long one. So the next one's a little shorter. So the third step would be that you need to set your budget. You can go anywhere from free online curriculum all the way up to spending, $1,500 per year. So there is a wide range. There's everything, and there's everything in between. There is a wide range for homeschooling. And so you have to figure out what works for your budget and what you would need in order to make it possible for you to homeschool. The fourth step is going to be one that is not necessary but can be helpful, and that's going to be to join some form of an online homeschooling group. Facebook is great. There's a lot of Facebook groups that you can join. And this is going to be mainly to help you kind of get your bearings and figure out what just the intricacies of homeschooling are. Things that you don't think about whenever you go into homeschooling, and terminology you may not know or understand. It's also helpful in determining which kind of curriculum that you would want to use. There are so many, and for all different teaching styles. It's also helpful for you as a new homeschooler to get multiple perspectives, because oftentimes as homeschoolers, we can be very passionate about how we homeschool, but it's not one way. There's not one right way to homeschool, and what works for me may not work for you and may not work for, your neighbor down the street. So there's several different ways to homeschool, and so whenever you ask a question, you have a question, having a community that you can ask several people at a time the same question, you can get multiple perspectives at once, and you can make the most informed decision based, again, on your specific needs for your family. Just like any group online, you can get a lot of catty people sometimes, and there can be a lot of gossip and a lot of bickering. And so I would not make a point to be on those boards all the time. I have learned it can cause a lot of grief. It's a good resource to use. It can be a very toxic place. So, you need to take the meat and leave the bones when it comes to stuff like that. And having these groups will actually be helpful for step 5. Step 5 is going to be figuring out what your teaching style is. And in order to do this, I am going to put another link in the description box for a video that Sonia Schaefer with Simply Charlotte Mason put together. And it's the 5 flavors of homeschooling. These are the five ways that you can homeschool your children. Watching this video will help explain what those 5 different ways are. And at the very end, there's a quiz that you can take to determine which style best fits you. And so this will give you a good starting point on figuring out, are you a traditional homeschooler? Are you more of an unschooler? Do you want to do classical homeschooling? And all of that probably won't make any sense to you, but watch the video and it will. And so there are so many different approaches on homeschooling. And like I said, you are going to be different than the next person. And so knowing what works for you is very important, because that is how you are going to be the most successful in homeschooling, is to homeschool in a way that is cohesive for your family and for you as a person and your personality. Word of caution on that: be honest whenever you're taking this quiz. Be realistic. For example, I love the idea of unit studies with all of the little projects, and I love the idea of sitting all around a table and doing all of these crafts with my kids. Realistically, I am not a super organized person, and that is not going to work for me. I love the idea of crafts. The actual execution, not so much. It can be very easy for me to be swept up in the idea of unit studies, and I may answer some things not in a way that is truly reflective of what I can do. So I would answer those questions based on what you think that you can do, not what you think you would like to do, because those aren't always the same things. Okay, so step number 6, once you've figured out your teaching style, now it's time to turn around and figure out your child's learning style. A lot of parents will say you need to cater to that child's learning style, that they're going to only learn in their learning style. And I agree and disagree with that. You can't pick a curriculum based on your child's learning style if you can't teach it. So if your child is very hands-on and they need all of the projects, but you aren't a super organized person and you know that you will never have the supplies ready all together to do the projects, they're not going to end up doing them, and they're not going to learn anyway. So there are ways that you can kind of tailor their curriculum that you're using to that specific child. For example, my oldest is a very visual learner, and so he absolutely has to read things in order to get them. So, a lot of the things that had me reading aloud a lot, he was not going to get. It has to be a situation where, for him, if I am going to be reading aloud, either he has to have a book to follow along with, or it needs to be a very short passage. So it cannot be long chapters of reading aloud. And the read alouds that we do are more for enjoyment than they are for educational purposes, because he has to read the material in order to get it. Now, somebody who's an auditory learner, you may end up reading aloud to them, or you could buy, the book on audio and have them listen to that book. So knowing your child's learning style will actually help you to figure out how to shift the curriculum around to work for that specific child. And each child is going to be different. So if you have 3 kids, you could have a visual and an auditory and a kinesthetic learner. And so the kinesthetic learner is a hands-on learner. And so, you may find that you need to do things a little differently with each child. But when we know each child's learning style, we can change our expectations of them so that they can succeed. If we are constantly expecting them, if they can't, like if I constantly expected my oldest to listen to me teaching him and listen to me reading to him and had that expectation that he was supposed to get it based on me reading to him, and then I get frustrated because he doesn't, well, it's not his learning style. You're kind of setting him up for a failure. And so it helps you to shift your view a little bit. Okay, so now that you know your teaching style and your child's learning style and you have your budget in place, now we get to move to the fun part. Now you actually get to start looking at curriculum. And this is where the groups are helpful too. So for example, say you take the test and you figure out that you're a traditional homeschooler. Taking that information and going into one of the groups that you have joined, you may be able to connect with a few people who also use traditional homeschool curriculum, and they may be able to point you down the right path based on the different needs of your family to find a curriculum that works for you. I would caution against immediately ascribing to one specific curriculum, jumping in, head on, okay, I'm a traditional homeschooler. Somebody said Abeka is traditional homeschool, so I am going to use Abeka. There are several different types of curriculum for each homeschooling style. There isn't just one. Really do your research, talk to a couple of different people, get a good idea of what all is out there, make your list. If you can go to a homeschool store, that's the very best is to be able to look at the curriculum yourself. If you are in the Houston area, there is a homeschool store. I think it's over near Katy, but there are a lot of places that don't have homeschool stores, which is a shame because it's really best to be able to look at the curriculum. So you may end up having to order online, but a lot of websites will let you flip through the book online so you can get an idea of what it looks like to be able to see what may work for your family. And also what may work for one child may work, something else may work for a different one. We don't have to use the exact same curriculum for each specific child, especially when you're getting into the things like math and language arts, history and science. A lot of times you can do those as a group subject, and so you'll probably end up using the same curriculum for all of them, if you have multiple children. But for things especially like math and language arts, those can be picked individually based on the kids and what they need. So the last step number 8, is actually not quite a step. It's more a word of advice. Be willing to change. Homeschooling is more than likely going to change you, and that's a good thing. When you go into your second and your third year of homeschooling, your ideas about what you wanted and what your goals were could possibly be very different than they were whenever you first started. So going into it, realizing that, I may think that I have this all figured out, and I may find what I think is the absolute best curriculum for our family, and then we get through this year and then it feels wrong. Don't stick to that curriculum just because you've already used it. Reevaluate, see where you've changed, see where your kids have changed. Homeschooling is a big change for everybody. So be willing to take those things into consideration whenever you are making those decisions later on down the road. So those are my steps. I have 3 final, I'm going to say, warnings to leave you with. I would strongly caution against doing a trial year. We hear this a lot in the homeschooling community. So people will say, I'm not sure that I can actually homeschool, so we're going to pull the kids for a year and see if I can do it or see if we can manage it. I've heard it from most people that I've talked to who have started homeschooling since I started homeschooling. Here's the thing. Your first year is going to be your absolute hardest year. bar none. Everybody is getting used to it, and you're learning to teach. They're learning to learn in a new environment and in a different way. And, you've taken them out of an environment that they're used to, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. If you feel like you should be homeschooling, then it's likely a good thing. It's going to take a lot of adjustment. So be patient with them. Be patient with yourself. Don't feel like at the very end of your first year, okay, I need to send them back to school because there's no way that I can do this. Because the first year, followed closely by the second, are normally the hardest years. For me, it was whenever I got halfway through my second year of homeschooling that I finally felt like I could do this. Like I understood it, like we were finally starting to turn around. Now that I'm in my fourth year, there's no doubt about it. I would never go back to public school. It's just, we love homeschooling. So my second warning is do not let family and friends influence you in a negative way. There's always going to be that negative Nancy who thinks that you're destroying your children's lives by homeschooling them. They will always be there. So don't feel like because you don't have everybody's blessing that you can't do it. You can't have everybody's approval all the time. So let that go. And eventually they may come around. And if they don't, then that's really a shame. But at the end of the day, this is between you and your spouse and your kids and hopefully the Lord. But this is about your family and your kids. And my last warning would be to release the expectations. Whenever I first started homeschooling, I had these visions in my head of having the little desks in the perfect little homeschool room, and we would get up and we would start school at 8 and we would just school until lunch, and then we had all of these really great plans, and that didn't happen. Now we mainly homeschool in our living room because it's the most comfortable. We don't start school until about 10:30 because we have learned that is just when everybody is their most focused. There's always distractions and there's always a lot, there's always kids bickering and a bunch of other stuff going on at the same time. And you learn to deal with it. You learn to cope. So letting go of those expectations early on is very helpful because homeschooling is supposed to be different than school. It's not supposed to be school at home. It's not supposed to look like school. It's supposed to look like homeschooling. It's supposed to be adding school to your life and living your life together and adding education into it. I think most of us would agree that at the very end of the day, we want our kids to love to learn. So if we are showing them that you can only learn if you are, sitting at a desk and doing school that way, then, they may never realize that they can continue to learn whenever they get out into the real world. Let go of what you think homeschooling should look like and embrace what it looks like for your family, because that's where you are going to succeed. Making the education work for your family instead of changing your family to try to work for the education. So those are my tips. I hope that I covered everything. If you have any extra questions that maybe I didn't cover, please leave it in the comments. I am always happy to help, and I love answering all of y'all's questions. If you are new here, I hope that you will consider subscribing. I try to put out videos every Tuesday and Friday. This week's video is late. I think last week's video was late too. I'm very pregnant right now, and so we've had it's been interesting. So this video is going up on a Saturday, but I normally put videos up Tuesdays and Fridays, and I do homeschooling, homemaking, motherhood, biblical womanhood, things like that. So if those things are of interest to you, I hope that you'll consider subscribing. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. So I hope that y'all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see y'all in my next video. Bye.